What happens when the smartest person in the room isn't wearing a suit, but a middle school backpack? When the school server crashes and panic sets in, a 12-year-old black student named Jalen Parker walks into the chaos and calmly says, "If you want the system back up before the afternoon bell, I can help." What happens next will challenge everything you thought you knew about intelligence, power, and who gets to lead. But beware, this story isn't about a miracle. It's about the truth no one wanted to see. Stick around to uncover the real reason why the school tried to silence him, and how he answered with code, not permission. Dear viewer, if you are watching my story for the first time, I humbly request you write the location from where you are watching right now, subscribe this channel and press the bell icon now not to miss the notifications of my daily published new stories. Thank you, and let's dive into the full story. Principal Bradford Langston stood behind the polished mahogany desk in his spacious corner office at Eastwood Preparatory Academy, clutching his forehead as if that would stop the chaos mounting outside his door. The school's central server had gone down just after the morning bell. Nothing was working, student files inaccessible, class schedules scrambled, standardized testing software dead on arrival, even the lunch payment system frozen. It was as if the school itself had shut down, and for Langston, image was everything. At 53, with silver-streaked hair and a suit tailored in Milan, he prided himself on appearances, the success rates, the high-tech campus, the elite staff. This was supposed to be a flagship school in the district, a private institution where reputation reigned, and right now that reputation was crumbling bite by bite. He had already barked at the IT technician, a meek contract worker who had shrugged and said it was beyond him. Beyond you? Langston had sneered. You've had one job all year. He slammed the office door behind the man. Students were loitering the halls without guidance, teachers were panicking, and parents were blowing up the front office phone lines. Down in room 2B, a small boy sat quietly in the back of an elective tech class, fingers idly turning a mechanical pencil while the others whispered and speculated. His name was Jalen Parker, a wiry 12-year-old with thick curls, skin the color of chestnut, and eyes that scanned everything with careful precision. He wasn't like the others. Eastwood Prep wasn't built for kids like him, not really. He wasn't here because his family was old money. He wasn't here because of nepotism or donations or name recognition. He was here because his mom, a custodian at the school, had begged for a scholarship after he scored off the charts on his district-wide placement tests. After many layers of bureaucracy, Langston had allowed it, as a PR move. "We're committed to diversity," he'd said at a board meeting with a clipped smile. But that was a year ago, and since then, Jalen had largely been ignored. Most teachers barely noticed him unless they were assigning group projects, and then they looked the other way when his classmates made him do all the work. Some of them still mispronounced his name, despite him correcting them a dozen times. He wasn't the loudest, or the most popular, or the most fashionable. But he watched. He remembered. He built things in his head and pulled them into real life when no one was looking. That's why he had noticed things over the past month: glitches in the server, bad code patches, odd login errors on teacher terminals. He knew what was coming. He had even tried to say something to Mrs. Guthrie, the computer science teacher, but she had waved him off. "That's not your concern, Jalen. Focus on what I'm assigning." But now, the system had failed just like he'd expected. He watched from the classroom window as teachers scrambled and yelled in the hallways. Some kids cheered, others looked confused. The smart boards flickered, the projectors buzzed and died, and someone said the school website had crashed too. That's when a loud voice came over the intercom. "All staff, please report to the main office immediately. We have an urgent systems issue. Teachers, hold your students in place. I repeat, hold your students in place." Jalen glanced around. The substitute teacher in his class, a retired math teacher who barely knew how to check email, looked overwhelmed and flushed. He wasn't going to be able to fix anything. Jalen took a deep breath, picked up his notebook, and quietly stood up. "Where do you think you're going?" the sub called after him. Jalen paused at the door. "To help," he said plainly, and walked out. In the main office, Langston was pacing as the school board liaison stood on speakerphone, demanding updates. Do you realize this affects student records, federal compliance, and, Langston cut the call. Useless, he muttered. That's when he saw a small figure step through the double glass doors. Excuse me, sir, Jalen said. Langston turned slowly, narrowing his eyes. You're not supposed to be in here. Where's your teacher? I left the room, Jalen said evenly. I think I know what's wrong with the server. Langston blinked, then scoffed. This isn't a game. Do you have any idea how serious this is? We have encrypted records and state-mandated backups that are failing. It's not something a child can understand. Jalen looked up at him without flinching. Your backup script wasn't updated after the last firmware change. The OS logs say the cron jobs have been failing silently for at least 6 days. When you updated the firewall configuration last night, it isolated the server from its mirror node. That's why it crashed. Langston stared. The IT technician, still lingering awkwardly in the hallway, leaned in. Wait, how do you know that? I checked the packet logs last week. I copied some to my USB, Jalen said. I tried to tell someone. Langston turned red. This is not some science fair, son. I don't need it to be, Jalen replied. But if you want the system back up before the afternoon bell, I can help. A long silence stretched through the room. The secretary, frozen at her desk, whispered, should we, let him try? Langston's jaw tightened. The idea that this boy, this child, this custodian's son, could solve what professionals could not was almost offensive to him. But the phones were ringing. The superintendent was scheduled to visit tomorrow. Every second counted. Langston exhaled, masking the panic with full patience. Fine. Show me. But if this is a joke, it's not, Jalen said, walking past him toward the terminal. The staff watched in silence as the 12-year-old plugged in his USB drive and began typing, windows opening, logs streaming down the screen. Langston stood rigid, arms crossed, his pride a shield he could barely keep intact. And then, as the school held its collective breath, the servers began to hum back to life. Jalen's fingers moved with a fluency that startled even the IT technician, who leaned closer as lines of code and network tools flicked open in rapid succession. The boy wasn't guessing, he was navigating with purpose. Wait, what's that command? The technician asked. Are you root? I elevated with a shell exploit, Jalen said calmly, not looking away. You never patched your auth daemon. I told Mrs. Guthrie 3 weeks ago. The technician looked at Langston, wide-eyed. He's right. That patch came out a month ago. Langston's jaw twitched. He didn't respond. Jalen accessed a series of buried logs, pointing out where the backup system had been silently failing. This is your first problem, he said, gesturing to the terminal. The script you're using was deprecated. It tried to write backups to a virtual drive that doesn't mount anymore. That's why your mirror failed. He tapped a few keys. I'm redirecting the process and reactivating the old snapshot cache. You'll lose a few hours of data, but most of it's still intact. A stunned silence settled over the office as, slowly, the systems began to reboot, first the digital class schedules, then the grading portals, then the intranet message board. Notifications popped up on the secretary's monitor like magic. It's coming back, she gasped. Langston leaned on the desk, scowling beneath his polished veneer. That doesn't mean you've fixed it permanently, he snapped. This could be a fluke. Jalen didn't flinch. It's not. But if you want a permanent solution, your infrastructure is 10 years behind. I can write a script to migrate your backup process to a secure cloud-based node. I'd need access to your DNS settings and firewall rules. Langston's lip curled. You expect me to give a student root access to the school's most secure systems? Jalen turned and looked him dead in the eye. You already gave it to the wrong people. That stung. The IT technician opened his mouth to object, then slowly closed it. He knew it was true. Over the next hour, Jalen moved through the network like a surgeon, isolating faulty scripts, restoring key services, and documenting vulnerabilities. Langston stood stiff as a board, his pride fighting against the mounting evidence that this boy, this overlooked scholarship student, was the only person in the building who actually knew what he was doing. But the most shocking moment came when Superintendent Gale arrived. A sharp-eyed woman in a gray suit, she swept into the office with her assistant, expecting to find chaos. Instead, she found a 12-year-old calmly typing while a half-dozen adults watched in stunned silence. "Who is this?" she asked, confused. Langston hesitated. "This is Jalen Parker. He's one of our students. He fixed the entire system," the secretary blurted. "The whole thing. He did what the tech team couldn't." Superintendent Gale turned to Jalen. "Is that true?" Jalen glanced up. "The server will hold for now. But your network is exposed. I can write a report." Gale raised her eyebrows, impressed despite herself. "How old are you?" 12. "And you're, what? A freshman?" 7th grade. She turned slowly to Langston. "And you weren't going to let him help?" Langston's face tightened. "I didn't think it was appropriate to entrust security to a student." Gale crossed her arms. "Well, he just saved your school from a data disaster. And maybe a lawsuit." As the weight of that statement settled into the room, Langston felt something crack inside him, not the server, but his sense of control. Something had shifted. The balance of respect had turned. And Jalen? He just sat back in the chair, quietly saving his report to the shared drive, as if this was just another ordinary Tuesday. The next day at Eastwood Preparatory Academy was unlike any Jalen had experienced since arriving at the elite private school nearly a year ago. Whispers followed him through the halls. Teachers who had never said his name properly were now doing double takes, some even offering nervous smiles. Students who once barely noticed him were now full of awkward questions. "Yo, you're the one who fixed the server, right? Are you like a hacker or something? Did they pay you?" Jalen just kept walking. He didn't like attention. Especially not this kind. Not when he knew it was only temporary. It wasn't admiration. It was shock. Curiosity. A break in their expectations they couldn't explain away. In the teacher's lounge that morning, the mood was more uncomfortable. Ms. Redding, the upper-grade literature teacher known for her expensive scarves and elitist air, huffed as she poured her coffee. It was reckless. That child should never have been allowed near administrative systems. "Come on," said Mr. Kurland, the gym teacher. He saved the day. "I don't even know what a DNS table is." "That's the problem," she snapped. "Neither do we. And we're supposed to be the adults. You think the board will thank us for being shown up by a middle schooler?" She shook her head, disgusted. "This school is built on structure, on credibility, on standards. You start letting 12-year-olds act like staff, you lose the line." Mrs. Guthrie, the computer science teacher who had dismissed Jalen just days before, sat silently, her hands clasped tightly. She looked humiliated. She should have known. She taught the very subject the boy had just mastered in real time. And she had ignored him. In Principal Langston's office, the temperature was no better. The superintendent's words from the day before still echoed in his head, "You weren't going to let him help." That single sentence had buried him in subtle shame. He now had a follow-up call with the school board scheduled for Friday. They wanted answers, how the system had failed, who was responsible, and why a child had been the one to fix it. Langston sat at his desk, fingers steepled, staring down at Jalen's report. The boy had typed out a full 10-page audit of the network, detailing vulnerabilities, backup failures, security oversights, and solutions. It read like a professional document. There was even a chart showing potential cost savings from migrating to a more secure cloud service. He didn't want it to be good. He didn't want it to be legitimate. But it was. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Mrs. Parker, Jalen's mother, stepped in quietly. She wore her janitor uniform, sleeves rolled up from scrubbing the cafeteria floor. Her expression was cautious but firm. "I heard what happened," she said, folding her hands. "My son told me." Langston didn't rise. "Yes. Quite the situation. He said he helped you fix it." Langston gave a thin smile. "He offered assistance. But of course, everything was handled within protocol." She raised an eyebrow. "That so?" She walked closer, voice level. "Because I know my son. And I know this school. I see how people look at him. I hear the way some of your teachers talk when they think no one's around. You never saw him coming, Mr. Langston." He stiffened. "Let's not turn this into something else. Your son is intelligent, yes. But he overstepped." "Overstepped," she repeated. "Or stepped up when no one else could." He stood now, slowly. "Mrs. Parker, this school is a high-performing academic institution. There are protocols. Credentials. Your son's talents are impressive, but this is not a place for," she cut him off. "For kids like him." A long silence. "You want his intelligence in a brochure, but not in your office," she said quietly. "I cleaned these halls for 7 years. Watched kids with family money and average grades get praised, while my boy got silence. And now that he saved you from embarrassment, you don't know whether to thank him or punish him." Langston's face was stony. "He'll be recognized." "Of course. We're planning an announcement." "I'm not asking for a trophy," she said. "I'm asking you to change the way you see him." She left before he could respond. Later that day, an announcement came over the intercom during last period. "Attention all students and staff, we'd like to recognize Jalen Parker of grade 7 for his extraordinary assistance yesterday during our network outage. His actions helped restore critical school functions. Thank you, Jalen." The words were hollow. It sounded more like PR damage control than genuine praise. In the cafeteria, students clapped lazily. Some shrugged. One 8th grader laughed and muttered, "Guess being a nerd finally paid off." Jalen sat quietly at the edge of the table, staring at his tray. He knew what this was. A pat on the head. Not a seat at the table. That evening, as the building emptied, he walked alone to the tech lab. The lights were off, but he had his badge, granted temporarily by the IT technician, who was at least grateful. He sat at the terminal and opened a blank file. Not for revenge. Not for validation. Just for himself. He started drafting a new security architecture for the school's entire network, one that wouldn't fail next time. Behind him, unnoticed, Mrs. Guthrie stood in the doorway watching. For the first time, she said nothing. By Thursday morning, the applause had faded, and so had the fake smiles. The brief storm of attention that followed Jalen's server fix had already begun to settle into a quiet discomfort. No one knew what to do with him now. He didn't fit the narrative Eastwood Preparatory Academy had carefully cultivated for decades: well-dressed legacy students, polished parent-donor events, meticulously framed photos of Ivy League-bound seniors on the walls. Jalen Parker wasn't in those photos. And deep down, many people wished they could rewind and undo the moment that brought him to the center of attention. That morning, Principal Langston called a closed meeting with select staff. No students, no parents, just department heads, the IT technician, and Superintendent Gale on speaker. The agenda was clear: infrastructure reform and student protocol. The real discussion, though, was about damage control. "I'm not saying the boy didn't help," said Ms. Redding, voice clipped. "But we cannot encourage other students to bypass the chain of command. There are legal liabilities involved in what he accessed. He exposed the liabilities, the IT tech countered. He didn't create them. And frankly, he knew more about the network than I did. That should scare you. Langston exhaled slowly. We're not debating his intellect. But we are responsible for maintaining professional standards. If we allow him to continue meddling in school systems, we open the door to chaos. What's next? A sixth grader editing attendance records? The room hummed with discomfort. No one said what they were thinking aloud, that their real issue wasn't with what Jalen had done, but who had done it. Superintendent Gale, her voice tinny through the speaker, cut in sharply. You should be asking yourselves how a seventh grader outperformed certified professionals. And why no one listened to him before it all fell apart. Langston's knuckles whitened around his pen. I'm requesting we restrict his system access immediately. Gale didn't reply for a long time. Then, coolly, he still has a scholarship, correct? Langston's voice barely concealed his irritation. Yes. A full one. Then you'll be fair with him. That boy is the only reason this school didn't suffer a catastrophic data breach. You'll find a way to support him, or I'll find a reason to reevaluate the school's leadership. Then the line clicked off. Langston's lips thinned. Meanwhile, Jalen was in the tech lab again. This time, he wasn't alone. 3 seniors had shown up that morning, part of a student-led tech club Langston hastily approved to give the appearance of inclusivity. Except these boys weren't here to collaborate. They leaned against the lab tables, arms crossed, eyes narrowing. Hey, genius, said Mason Boyd, a senior whose father sat on the board. Heard you got root access. That true? Jalen didn't look up from the terminal. Not anymore. Good, said another. Don't need some middle schooler poking around where he doesn't belong. Jalen turned now, slowly. Then maybe someone else should have fixed it. Mason stepped closer. You know why you're here, right? You're the scholarship kid. The mascot. They let one of you in to prove we're not racist. That's it. The words weren't surprising. Jalen had heard versions of them before, just never so direct. Funny, he said softly. If that's what I am, then what does that make all of you? I didn't need a board member dad to solve something you couldn't even understand. Mason's smile faded. That afternoon, Jalen was called to Langston's office again. This time, there was no pretense of politeness. We appreciate what you did, Langston said, eyes fixed on a file in front of him, but we've determined that your access to any administrative systems must be revoked immediately. For your safety, and for liability reasons. I didn't ask for access, Jalen replied. You had a crisis. I helped. Going forward, Langston continued, I'd like you to redirect that energy into more age-appropriate projects. The robotics elective could use a good student leader. You'll be safer there. Jalen blinked. So you want me to stop solving problems you can't? Langston's jaw tensed. I want you to understand your place, young man. A long silence stretched between them. Jalen stood. My place is wherever the truth is broken. He turned and walked out. That night, at home, his mom found him rebuilding a Raspberry Pi in silence. She didn't ask questions. She knew that silence. It wasn't hurt. It was focus. Some of them are never going to see you for who you are, she said, sitting beside him on the couch. But that doesn't mean you stop being it. He nodded slowly. I'm gonna build my own system. Her eyebrows rose. At school? No, he said. Outside of it. He opened his laptop and began designing a security program that could test for the kind of vulnerabilities Eastwood tried to ignore. Not for extra credit. Not for recognition. Because brilliance doesn't need permission. The next week passed in strange contrast. On the surface, everything at Eastwood Preparatory Academy had returned to its pristine, well-ordered normal. Teachers resumed handing out assignments from glowing projectors. Students filed into their classrooms in pressed uniforms, whispering about finals and field trips. Administrators moved through the hallways like the minor crisis never happened. But beneath it all, behind the handshakes and policy memos, something had changed. Something permanent. Jaylen Parker wasn't being ignored anymore. But he wasn't being celebrated either. Instead, he was being managed. Corridors he used to walk through unnoticed now seemed narrower, filled with eyes that tracked him. His name was no longer a forgettable syllable in attendance, it was a cautionary whisper in faculty lounges. He could feel it, every adult he passed seemed more interested in containing him than nurturing him. The tech lab, once his quiet sanctuary, had been reassigned to shared use only. His login credentials had been scrubbed and replaced with a restricted student profile. All the professional development software he'd previously explored, most of it by simply reading manuals on his own time, was now locked behind staff logins. Even his robotics teacher had been given guidance from the administration, let Jaylen lead, but only on curriculum-approved projects. The walls were closing in. Still, Jaylen didn't fight it head-on. He didn't storm offices or beg for access back. He didn't shout in lunchrooms or lash out in class. Instead, he did what all visionaries do when systems refuse to see them. He built his own. He started small. At home, he partitioned a spare hard drive from a junked laptop and loaded it with an open-source Linux OS. He wrote a lightweight scanner script that could simulate Eastwood's entire network environment based on memory. He filled notebooks with diagrams of protocols and possible exploits, not to use, but to understand. He studied everything the adults thought he shouldn't know. And then he started building something real, a diagnostic program that could sweep any server network, identify outdated systems, and automatically rewrite the flawed cron tasks and backup links. By the second week, he named it Gatekeeper. By the third, it was working. Gatekeeper was fast, precise, and elegantly written, code so clean it looked like it had been drafted by a software engineer with a decade of experience. And Jaylen didn't stop there. He built a companion web dashboard with live monitoring capabilities, remote alerts, and encryption layers. Then he taught himself how to host it securely, outside of Eastwood systems, on an independent server hosted through a cloud grant program he applied for using only his initials. No one at Eastwood knew what he was doing. But he wasn't alone. Over the past few months, he'd noticed something most others missed, other students, quiet ones, overlooked ones, who had brilliance hiding in their fingers and eyes but no place to let it live. Kayla Mendoza from 8A, who could dismantle and rebuild a drone blindfolded. Tariq Hammond from 6C, who taught himself 3 coding languages off library books. Zoe Lee, who never spoke in class but left detailed bug reports on school software her teachers never read. Jaylen started messaging them. He called the group Layer 1. Not a club. Not an organization. A network. A foundation of talent the school refused to see. They met at the public library down the street from Eastwood on Saturdays. No one in administration knew. They sat around dusty tables, laptops and notebooks open, solving problems bigger than any worksheet ever handed to them. And they used Gatekeeper as their flagship project. Word spread quietly. By the 4th Saturday, there were 10 of them. By the 6th, 15. Meanwhile, inside Eastwood, the staff tried to pretend nothing was happening. Principal Langston was still chasing the board's approval for a new IT vendor to quietly erase the embarrassment of the crash. He was drafting policy updates designed to limit unsanctioned technological access by minors. But the harder he tried to reinstate control, the more the truth unraveled behind him. Because even as Eastwood ignored him, outside its walls, someone else was paying attention. It started with a simple email to Jaylen's dummy account, from *outreach@codabridgefoundation.org, mail to outreach@codabridgefoundation.org, subject * your work on Gatekeeper. Dear J. Parker, we recently came across your Gatekeeper repository on the open source forums. We're not sure how old you are, but if you're a student, we'd like to speak with you. We think what you've built has the potential to change the way schools protect student data across the country. Would you be open to a conversation? It was real. Verified. The CodeBridge Foundation was one of the largest education-focused tech nonprofits in the country. Jalen stared at the message for a long time, heart pounding. The next evening, he told his mother. They said they saw the code, she asked, sitting across from him at their modest kitchen table. He nodded. She took a long breath. You're going to have choices they can't take from you, baby. No matter how tight they hold their gates. He smiled quietly. That's why I called it Gatekeeper. She touched his hand. So what are you going to do now? Jalen's eyes lit up. Show them that the gate doesn't stop me. That week, he replied to CodeBridge. The week after, he had his first remote call with their lead developer. They didn't ask how old he was until the end. You're 12, the woman asked, stunned. That's incredible. I know, Jalen said, without arrogance. Just truth. She laughed. I've met grown adults who can't write code this clean. You want to help us pilot it in a real district? He nodded. I already know where it should be tested first. She paused. Where? He smiled. Here. And just like that, Jalen Parker, Eastwood's managed problem, their overlooked footnote, was about to become something far bigger than they ever allowed him to imagine. He wasn't walking through the gates anymore. He was rewriting the locks. By mid-March, Eastwood Preparatory Academy was deep into test prep season. Teachers barked about state assessments, admin buzzed about performance benchmarks, and stress pulsed like static through every hallway. But beneath the surface of the high-achieving charade, cracks had begun to spread, quietly, invisibly, with Jalen Parker at the center. The school's internal systems, despite the rushed, professional repairs Langston had commissioned, were breaking again. Logins froze. Grading apps lagged. Reports disappeared and reappeared. Nothing major, yet, but enough to rattle the staff. The expensive IT firm brought in as a face-saving move sent weekly apologies and vague updates. Langston's patience frayed thinner by the day. What no one at Eastwood realized was that Jalen wasn't sabotaging anything. He wasn't hacking, tampering, or interfering in any illegal way. He had no need to. The systems were already broken. All Jalen had to do was let them fail naturally, and document every inch of it. With Gatekeeper humming quietly on his personal cloud server, he and the Layer 1 group ran simulations, analyzed data leaks, and pulled publicly visible metadata that showed just how badly Eastwood's infrastructure was being mismanaged. Week by week, they compiled it into a confidential report titled, Eastwood Prep, an internal collapse in data ethics and system integrity. It read like a legal deposition. Every oversight. Every patch skipped. Every admin credential stored in plaintext. Every time a student complaint had been ignored, every failed compliance protocol. The kids didn't invent anything, they proved it. Jalen wrote the introduction himself. We are students. Not interns. Not pawns. Not props for your brochures. You gave us limits. We found possibilities. You gave us silence. We answered with code. You treated us like liabilities. But we are the system's best defense. He didn't publish it right away. First, he submitted a copy directly to the CodeBridge Foundation. Then he encrypted another version and sent it anonymously to the school board under the subject line, Evidence of Incompetence and Student Endangerment at Eastwood Prep. Within days, the school board's legal office responded. Not to Jalen. To Principal Langston. Monday morning began with frost in the air and fire in the conference room. The superintendent and 3 board members arrived unannounced. Langston, already irritated by another glitch in the school's teacher portal, tried to keep control, but something was wrong. They weren't just here for updates. Let's talk about this, Superintendent Gale said, laying a printed packet on the table. Langston's fingers tensed as he flipped through the report. Page after page of charts, screenshots, and citations. It was surgical. Devastating. Where did this come from? He asked. A group of students, one board member said. Led by a 7th grader named Jalen Parker. Langston's face darkened. This is political theater. This boy has been undermining our infrastructure ever since he was given access. No, Gale said. He's been doing your job. You're siding with a child. I'm siding with competence. Langston stood, temper finally slipping. That boy is dangerous. He doesn't respect authority, he's been collecting data off-site, he's manipulating perception, and everything in this report is true, the board member interrupted. Your denial isn't a defense. It's an indictment. That afternoon, Langston summoned Jalen to his office. This time, there was no performance. No artificial patience. No fake smiles. You've been collecting data on this school, he asked, voice cold. I've been documenting what you ignored. You had no permission. I didn't need it. It's all public, unencrypted, or unsecured. That's the problem. Langston leaned in, voice low and acidic. Do you think this makes you powerful? You don't belong here. You never did. Jalen met his eyes calmly. That's why I built something you can't touch. Langston straightened. You're being expelled. Jalen didn't flinch. No, I'm not. Langston blinked. Excuse me. You don't get to make that decision anymore, Jalen said. The board is voting. Tomorrow. They're not voting on me. Langston's throat went dry. What are you talking about? They're voting on you. The next day, Eastwood's auditorium was packed. Parents, staff, even a few local reporters, word had leaked. The board was holding an emergency session. Jalen sat near the back, hoodie pulled over his curls, flanked by members of Layer 1. Superintendent Gale addressed the room. The integrity of Eastwood Prep has been compromised, she began. Not by hackers or saboteurs, but by neglect, arrogance, and the systemic dismissal of student voices. A 7th grader had to become the school's firewall. That is unacceptable. Gasps echoed across the room. Effective immediately, she continued, Principal Bradford Langston is placed on administrative leave, pending formal review. And we will be conducting a full audit of this school's technological practices and leadership culture. Langston stood up mid-statement, red-faced. This is an ambush. It's accountability, Gale snapped. Something you refuse to model. He stormed out without another word. Reporters surged toward the board, shouting questions. But the cameras found Jalen. One of them asked, "Did you want this to happen?" He looked up and simply said, "I wanted them to listen." By nightfall, the news had broken citywide. And for the first time in Eastwood Prep's long, elitist history, the most important name in the building wasn't on the donor wall. It was Jalen Parker's. By Wednesday morning, the marble-floored corridors of Eastwood Preparatory Academy had never felt more uncertain. Principal Langston's office remained locked and silent, his nameplate removed in the night by an administrative assistant who said nothing but blinked twice as she passed students whispering outside her door. Parents gathered at drop-off in tight, murmuring circles. Teachers clung to lesson plans like life preservers. The school's entire hierarchy, so long built on the polished illusion of control, was beginning to tremble. But Jalen Parker wasn't trembling. He walked into school with his backpack slung low, earbuds in, and the unmistakable awareness of eyes tracking him everywhere he moved. Some students nodded as he passed. Others stared openly, unsure whether to be impressed, afraid, or simply confused by the fact that a 12-year-old had just changed everything. When he entered room 2B, the substitute teacher, now more alert than he'd ever been, stood awkwardly and said, "Welcome back, Jalen. You're, Clear to continue attending classes. Wasn't worried about that, Jalen said, dropping into his seat. That morning, as teachers scrambled to realign themselves with whatever new power structure was forming, the school's main webpage updated quietly. There, on the homepage, was a photo from the night before, Superintendent Gale shaking hands with Jalen in the auditorium after Langston's removal. No quote. No caption. Just a powerful image that said everything Eastwood had never wanted to say aloud. A student had become the school's most trusted voice. And the truth was, the power that came with that status terrified some of them. By lunchtime, it became clear that a handful of teachers and parents were not ready to accept the shift. Ms. Redding, the literature teacher whose disdain had always been barely masked, posted an article to the staff-only forum titled, "When We Reward Disruption Over Discipline." It never mentioned Jalen by name, but every sentence dripped with veiled contempt. We must protect our academic culture from a dangerous trend of celebrating rule-breaking under the banner of innovation. Some teachers agreed. Others stayed quiet. But Mrs. Guthrie, who had once dismissed Jalen outright, responded with a sentence that froze the entire forum. Sometimes what we call disruption is really just brilliance we've refused to mentor. She deleted it minutes later. That afternoon, the board introduced Dr. Valerie Owens as Eastwood's interim head of school, a black woman in her early 40s with a background in student-first reform and a reputation for challenging institutional arrogance. She met with every department head in private, then with students from each grade level, starting with the middle school. Jalen's meeting was scheduled last. When he entered the office, Dr. Owens stood and extended her hand. "I've read everything. The report. The code. Your documentation. It's incredible." Jalen shook her hand quietly. "I won't ask how you taught yourself all of that," she said, gesturing for him to sit. "But I will ask what you want." He hesitated. No one had ever asked him that directly, not like this. "I want a school that doesn't waste kids like us," he said. "I want places where people like me don't have to prove we belong after we've already saved everything." She nodded slowly, absorbing it. "I want that too." Jalen opened his notebook. Gatekeeper isn't finished. It can be more than security. It can be a full platform, training modules, peer review tools, predictive analytics for school systems, stuff that helps stop the next crash before it even happens. Not just here. Anywhere. Dr. Owens leaned forward. "Would you be willing to build that, here? As a real program?" He met her eyes. "Only if it doesn't get buried under red tape." "I'll make sure it doesn't," she said. "You'll lead it. Not as a mascot. Not as a side note. As the architect." He paused. "You'd let a 12-year-old run a program like that?" "I'm not interested in age," she said. "I'm interested in vision. And you've got it." That evening, Jalen emailed the Layer 1 group, subject asterisk it's time. "We're going to build something real, on our terms. Eastwood can either catch up or get out of the way. See you Saturday." JP by Friday, whispers were spreading fast. That Jalen had been offered control of a new digital literacy initiative. That the board was backing him. That the new head of school had defended him publicly at a faculty meeting. Some students were in awe. Others were bitter. A few, like Mason Boyd, quietly muttered that this was a stunt. But none of it mattered. Jalen wasn't playing their game anymore. At home that night, as he and his mom ate takeout on the couch, she scrolled through her phone and found a local headline, "Custodian's Son Saves Elite School from Collapse." She handed it to him silently. He read it once and shook his head. "They still can't tell the story right." "No," she said. "But you can." And Jalen knew she was right. He wasn't waiting for permission anymore. He was about to give the entire system a new blueprint. By the following week, Eastwood Prep no longer felt like the same school that had tried to contain Jalen Parker. The curtains were being pulled back on every level, accountability memos from the new administration, revised policies posted on bulletin boards, and quietly nervous meetings where teachers now asked questions they would have scoffed at a month ago. But none of that changed what Jalen knew: paper reforms didn't mean power had shifted. Not really. Not yet. He also knew he couldn't do it alone. So, that Saturday, in the quiet basement of the downtown library, Layer 1 convened. Not as an informal meetup anymore, but as a team. 15 students, ranging in age from 11 to 17. Mostly black, brown, first-gen, kids who spoke in logic loops, built circuits for fun, and saw patterns where others saw noise. They weren't just talented. They were invisible brilliance, pushed to the sidelines of a school that had never planned for them. Jalen stood in front of a whiteboard and tapped it with a marker. Gatekeepers going public. We've got 4 months to turn it into a platform that other schools can actually use. We're not just protecting systems, we're rewriting the relationship schools have with student data, infrastructure, and student-led learning. Tariq, 13, tilted his head. Like open source for school tech. Exactly, Jalen nodded. But cleaner. We make it modular. One school wants security monitoring. Done. Another wants student-led diagnostics. Plug and play. No bureaucracy. Just tools. Zoe, 12, raised her hand shyly. Can we anonymize school performance analytics too? So they can't use it to track and punish kids? Jalen smiled. That's priority number 3. Kayla, from the robotics team, leaned forward. And who owns it? Jalen looked around. We do. The energy in the room changed. For the next 3 hours, they planned the public beta of Gatekeeper 2.0. Roles were assigned: front-end, back-end, documentation, testing. Some had barely written formal code before, but Jalen wasn't interested in credentials, only in curiosity. If someone didn't know how to do something, they learned it together. No shame. No gatekeeping. Just creation. By the time the library lights dimmed, they had a roadmap, a Git repo, and a mission statement that read, Gatekeeper, designed by the overlooked. Built for the underserved. Made to protect what schools ignore. On Monday, Jalen presented that mission to Dr. Owens in a slim briefing folder. She read it, looked up, and simply said, "Let's make this your first official project under the Eastwood Tech Innovation Lab. You'll have a team room by next week. Budget's being pulled from the Emergency Systems Fund. Oh, and I want a pitch version to present to the district." Jalen raised an eyebrow. The whole district? She smiled. I don't plan to keep you a secret. That week, Eastwood's former hierarchy began to bend around Jalen's orbit. Staff who'd once ignored him now sent emails asking for his feedback. One math teacher even asked him to review a flawed grading script. Some of it felt genuine. Some of it didn't. But he wasn't there for their praise. He was building a structure that didn't require their approval. Outside of school, the buzz had begun to grow louder. CodeBridge featured Gatekeeper in their monthly newsletter. A local university's youth research center reached out about sponsoring Layer 1's library workspace. Even a podcast wanted to interview Jalen about student-led innovation and equity. Still, inside the school, resistance hadn't disappeared. It had just gone quiet. Ms. Redding and others like her hadn't forgotten what Jalen had exposed. To them, he was a walking reminder of what they'd ignored, and they resented it. He heard the whispers in the hallway. Think he's running the school now? Langston should have never let that kid near a server. He's just a kid with a keyboard and a chip on his shoulder. But he didn't flinch. Because he did have a chip on his shoulder. And now he had a team, and a blueprint, to turn it into infrastructure. On the third Saturday, as Layer 1 reviewed their progress, Jalen called for silence. He pulled out a printed envelope. It was thick and embossed with a university seal. I got this yesterday, he said, unfolding it. They leaned in. It's an invite to present Gatekeeper at the National Youth Tech Symposium in Chicago. Travel funded. Full keynote spot. Everyone stared. Zoe blinked. They're sending you to present? They're sending us, Jalen said. They want the whole team. The room erupted. Some hooped. Others grinned silently in disbelief. But there's a catch, he continued. We only have 6 weeks. We're not going to stand in front of those people with something that's halfway done. We finish it. Secure it. Polish it. And we show them what overlooked kids can do with no gatekeepers in the way. He looked around the room. You ready? Every head nodded. Jalen grinned. Then let's build this thing all the way out. Because now, for the first time, not just in Eastwood, but maybe the entire district, the most important system in the school wasn't on a server. It was in their hands. 6 weeks. That was the countdown. 42 days to take Gatekeeper from an idea born out of exclusion into a fully functioning platform worthy of national attention. And for every hour after school and every weekend in the library basement, Layer 1 worked like a startup fueled not by funding, but by fire. While other students at Eastwood worried about spring socials and elective credits, Jalen and his team built data pipelines, created onboarding wizards, and mapped intuitive dashboards. They met with youth equity consultants. They wrote plain-language privacy policies. And every time an adult at school gave them a confused or condescending look, it only made their work sharper. Eastwood had been built on exclusion. Gatekeeper was built to tear that design down. Jalen oversaw every detail. He debugged code at 3 a.m. and still showed up to class on time. He walked into honors algebra already knowing the answers. He absorbed every backhanded comment about his special project from teachers like Ms. Redding and let it roll off his shoulders. He had bigger things to carry now. The day before the team was scheduled to fly out to Chicago for the symposium, Dr. Owens called Jalen into her office. Not to manage him, but to ask him a question. Do you know what you're walking into tomorrow? She asked. Jalen shrugged. I've read the schedule. We're the youngest presenters by almost a decade. Every other team has grad students and sponsorships. Dr. Owens smiled. And they've all seen your name on the docket. Some of them are already mad. Because they don't know how to compete with a kid who wasn't supposed to be in the game. He looked at her carefully. Then they'd better watch closely. She handed him a folder. District reps going with you. Not to babysit. To take notes. The next morning, Jalen, Kayla, Zoe, Tarek, and 3 others from Layer 1 boarded a flight together. For most of them, it was their first time on a plane. They didn't wear school-branded polos or matching jackets. They wore hoodies, sneakers, and the confidence of knowing they'd built something no adult in their lives had dared to imagine possible. The symposium was held in a sprawling downtown convention center, the kind with glass walls and Wi-Fi that never dropped. Huge banners for major ed-tech firms and university research labs hung from every corridor. Attendees wore lanyards, spoke in acronyms, and threw around phrases like data-informed decision cycles and modular equity architecture. Jalen listened carefully to every panel. Not because he didn't understand, but because he wanted to make sure he never talked like them. When it was finally their turn, Layer 1 took the stage without a script. Jalen stepped to the podium, looked at the sea of adults in polished shoes and expensive eyewear, and began. My name is Jalen Parker. I'm 12 years old. I go to a school that didn't want to listen to me until their system crashed. I didn't build Gatekeeper to impress you. I built it to protect kids like us from schools that forget we're not just users, we're data. And if you don't understand your own systems, your students are the ones who pay the price. He gestured behind him. On the screen, the Gatekeeper interface came alive, live demoed by Kayla and Zoe. It mapped vulnerabilities, flagged unsafe login patterns, suggested ethical data protocols, and auto-generated reports readable by non-tech administrators. All wrapped in a clean, accessible design that looked nothing like anything the symposium had seen before. Tariq took over halfway through the demo. We didn't get this from a grant. We didn't build it with university mentors. We built it because no one else was doing it for us. A hand shot up from the audience, a cybersecurity consultant from a major university. How do you plan to scale this? You're not even high school students. Jalen answered immediately. By partnering with districts who want solutions, not status. And by trusting students more than you trust their grades. Another hand. You're handling data, what about FERPA compliance? Zoe stepped forward, her voice steady. Our protocols were reviewed by CodeBridge and verified against the 2023 compliance update. We also included a student consent framework no adult team here thought to build. The crowd murmured. By the time they finished, it wasn't applause that followed. It was silence. Then one man in the third row stood up. A program director from a national digital learning consortium. I've been coming to this conference for 10 years, he said, voice full of astonishment. And I've never seen a team this young set the bar this high. Then came the applause. Not polite. Not obligatory. Loud. Long afterward, dozens of people approached them. Nonprofit reps, edtech CEOs. Program leads. Not one of them asked how old they were first. They asked what they needed to take Gatekeeper live. Back in the hotel, Jalen sat on the windowsill overlooking the city, laptop on his knees. He opened a blank document and wrote 4 words, "We are the system." Because they were. Layer 1 wasn't a project anymore. It was proof. That brilliance could be born anywhere. That being overlooked wasn't a weakness, it was a weapon. And that no matter how elite the building, or how locked the doors, the right kid with the right mind could rewrite every rule inside it. The return to Eastwood Prep wasn't triumphant. There were no banners, no balloons. No official emails from the board, no announcement over the intercom. Just the quiet knowledge, among students, staff, and a handful of administrators, that something irreversible had occurred. They knew Jalen Parker had gone to Chicago. They knew he had come back different. But most importantly, they knew the world had started to notice what Eastwood spent years trying to ignore. Word spread faster than the school's sluggish website could update. Gatekeeper was featured on education blogs, open-source developer forums, and even mentioned by a panelist on a national education policy livestream. CodeBridge officially partnered with Layer 1, offering them server space, legal support, and internship stipends. Jalen didn't brag. He didn't need to. His work spoke louder than praise. At school, the friction continued, but it changed shape. Some students were now eager to join Layer 1, offering to help with UI design, language localization, or even just debugging. But others, especially from families with long Eastwood lineage, still whispered about how Jalen embarrassed the school. A few staff members remained cold, clinging to an order that no longer existed. Ms. Redding walked past him in the hall and muttered, "Every institution has its limit." He turned to her, looked her dead in the eyes, and replied, "That's why we build new ones." But the biggest shift came when the school board released its findings from their internal investigation. It was a 23-page report. Buried on page 11, between discussions of infrastructure failures and policy loopholes, was a sentence that changed everything. It is recommended that Eastwood establish a permanent, student-led tech and equity board to guide ongoing decisions related to digital learning, security, and innovation, based on the success and leadership demonstrated by student Jalen Parker and the Gatekeeper initiative. For the first time, a school that once denied his relevance was institutionalizing his vision. Layer 1 moved into a renovated, unused AV room on the first floor. It had been a storage closet filled with broken monitors and unused furniture. But Jalen and his team cleared it, painted it themselves, and set up a fully functioning lab, complete with posters that read, "The future isn't waiting for you to believe in it." And above their door, no permission needed. The room became more than a tech hub. It became a place where students, kids who never fit neatly into Eastwood's clean rows, came to build what no one else believed they could. It didn't matter if they were in 6th grade or barely passing math. If they had ideas, they had a seat. Jalen mentored younger students who reminded him of himself, quiet, curious, underestimated. He taught them how to write clean code, not to impress teachers, but to solve real problems. He showed them how to read beyond the assignment, to learn for the sake of power, not points. Dr. Owens visited weekly. Not to supervise. To learn. Once, she leaned against the doorway and asked him, "Do you think we'll ever get the whole school to see what you see?" Jalen answered without looking up from his code. "We don't need the whole school. Just enough of it to crack the door open." 1 month later, Gatekeeper was adopted by 3 public schools in the city. 2 charter networks reached out. A university research department asked for collaboration. Jalen refused to put his name at the front of it. He insisted it say, "Created by students from Layer 1." Because it was never about spotlight. It was about freedom. One afternoon, as Jalen left campus, a younger student, probably 3rd or 4th grade, ran up to him holding a notebook. "Are you Jalen?" the kid asked breathlessly. "The real one?" Jalen smiled. "I guess so. I want to learn how to do what you do." Jalen paused. He knelt down and looked the boy in the eye. "Then start building. You don't have to wait for anyone. Not even a teacher. Especially not." The boy grinned and ran off. Jalen stood there for a moment, backpack on one shoulder, sun low in the sky. The school behind him still looked like Eastwood, polished, proud, self-important. But inside, something had changed forever. Because the school's most important system wasn't the one on its servers. It was the network of kids who finally saw what they could become when no one got in their way. Jalen didn't save Eastwood. He rewrote it. Not from the top down. From the inside out. And he didn't ask for permission. He didn't need to. Dear friend, brilliance knows no age. And too often, the genius of underrepresented kids is buried beneath silence, bias, and underestimation. This isn't just a story, it's a reflection of how many systems fail to see what's right in front of them. Jalen's journey is a reminder that true leadership doesn't ask for approval, it creates change. Let this be a call to honor, uplift, and believe in the kids who aren't handed a platform but build one anyway. If this story moved you, even just a little, like this video to amplify voices that deserve more than applause. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you never miss stories that inspire, challenge, and empower. Let's build a world where brilliance doesn't need permission.